Hello everyone, Emily back again for our next installment of Seward's travel series. I had the privilege of reading through the travel memoir for June this month, where Seward picks up at the very tail end of May, where Alyssa left us in Cairo, and he travels via land, probably by carriage, up to Alexandria, which is a port city right on the Mediterranean. And as you'll see throughout the entirety of the month of June, he's stopping on really all these port cities right here in the Mediterranean area. It's also important to note that the Ottoman Empire was very much present in this area until the early 20th century, so all of the high-ranking officials that Seward's meeting with are of Turkish descent. Also, since it's June, it would have been quite warm in this area as well, probably about 100 degrees and very dry. And that's actually the first thing that Seward notes when he gets to Alexandria, is how dry and stern and sterile the land is. However, he notes all of the growth that's been made over the past 2,000 years, and even since he visited in 1859. So Seward travels abroad to the Middle East right before the 1860 election and goes to this area. So he's returning back again, and even in the time that's passed, he noticed how many improvements have been made. He notes seeing windmills, villas of Italian style. He sees Pompey's Pillar, which is a Roman triumphal column built to honor the Roman Emperor Diocletian. And so he's very much in tune throughout the whole month with the architecture of this area. And once we get to Greece, he'll be very much comparing Grecian architecture with Egyptian architecture. He says Egypt, they have very large architectural buildings. They have the pyramids, so they're very large and not a lot of detail, which we'll see more in Greece. So he's really noting what he sees around him. And he says, quote, "It seems we have already entered Europe and left Egypt behind us. A throng of fashionably dressed Europeans are promenading, and French and English equipages are frequent in the streets." So very much in tune with the culture in this area. And once he is welcomed, he is brought in by a viceroy of Turkey. He has dinner with a pacha, which is a title of a Turkish officer of high rank. So they really welcome him with these honors. There's a band, the military's there. Seward notes he goes to the Khedive, which is the viceroy. And Khedive is an honorific title of a man of Persian origin. So he goes to the Khedive's palace. He says the gates were guarded and the courts graced with battalions of fine troops. The viceroy asks about his trip and how he's doing. They're very much engaged with Seward. He also visits his yacht. He describes it as a sea palace moving with steam engines and side wheels. And so there's a lot of Western civilization growth here. And when Seward's there having dinner, they're talking to him about how much they've taken on the Western civilization and what Seward thinks of their advancements. So it's really interesting to see how they're still honoring him as a former politician and very much regarding him very highly, and his opinions of the area were regarded very highly. On his way out of Alexandria, he spends about a week there. He visits Sir Henry Bulwer. Bulwer was actually the British minister in Washington during the administration of President Taylor, just as Seward was starting his first senatorial term. They actually started a cordial friendship to secure the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. So it's interesting to see that Seward along the way is really meeting up with former politicians that he had friendships with. And as you'll notice, Seward is constantly being sort of paraded around, and he's often carried in a chair, or he's on donkey or camel. Now at this time, again, he's 70 years old, so he's quite elderly. He also notes a lot of the Topographical top areas topographically are very hilly and very rocky, so it was very hard for him to get around on foot. But also since it's so warm and he's quite elderly. So they leave Egypt. Seward remarks, "The bright light of the pharaohs reminded us that it was here that the humane institution of this form of beacon for navigators had its origin, in a structure on the same spot, deemed too remarkable for its majesty and beauty by the ancients as to be accepted by them as one of the 7 wonders of the world." So he's really in awe, again, of these large structures that greet him on his travels. So he then takes a steamer ship over to Port Said, where he just spends a day. He notes that they throw an anchor in, and it's been a new experience for him because over the past 3 weeks coming up the Nile, they've just been throwing stakes into the banks of the Nile. So Seward meets with the superintendent of the Suez Canal. They travel briefly down the Suez and then back. And then from there, Seward heads to Jaffa. So again, another port city on the Mediterranean. Finally, in the 11th month of their voyage, their circumnavigation of the globe, they land in Palestine. And this was really a place that Seward enjoyed quite well. He extensively talks about the religion and the people of this place. So really, just to condense this down and give an overview, he spends about 2 weeks between Jaffa and Jerusalem. He would actually go off and even travel to Bethlehem as well. And there's a lot of references to Christianity, to Jesus, and the deep-rooted history of religions in this area that Seward is very much in tune with, though he wasn't very religious himself. Most of his religious beliefs came from his wife Frances, who of course has passed at this point. But he notices, after being almost dazzled to blindness by the reflection of a tropical sunlight from the glaring sand of the desert, it's gratefully refreshing to look out upon the green fields of Sharon. So Sharon Plain, which has religious origins, is situated between the Mediterranean and the Cimmerian Hills. So where he's coming from, Alexandria, where it's very dry and sterile, he now sees this lush grass of the Sharon Plain. He notes that this city is very handsome with a rocky cliff overhanging the sea. He is met by a Mr. Benjamin Finkelstein, who is an attaché of the consulate of Jerusalem. So again, he's welcomed here with honors. He's transferred to a surfboat to go ashore. He was carried ashore as well because again, he's very fragile at this point and elderly. The Turkish cavalry and infantry, they take him in and they give him honors. And then he heads on via land to Jerusalem, where he spends, again, a lot of time. And so just to recap some of the things he does in Jerusalem throughout the month, he goes to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which again has roots with Christianity and Jesus. He goes to the Mosque of Omar, which now crowns the Mount of Moriah, stands upon the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon. He climbs Mount Zion, they climb the base of Mount Olive, they go to the Western Wall, and then he's also invited to attend a service at the synagogue. So while he was actually at the Western Wall, a man goes up to him, recognizes him again. He's being welcomed around by the Turkish Empire, so they know he's somebody of high rank, and they welcome him in to experience a service at the synagogue. And so the reason he's treated with these absolute highest honors is because something called a firman, which is here, you'll see in our diplomatic gallery. And this firman was pretty much a letter to give Seward the privilege to travel around without harm. And the translation of it as follows: His Imperial Majesty, Sultan Abdul Aziz Khan, son of Sultan Mahmud Khan, may his victories be perpetuated. that the bearer of this present royal and sovereign document is the Honorable William H. Seward, formerly the Chief Minister of the Government of the United States of America, who with his companions is visiting for the purposes of travel my province of Syria, and that it is my sovereign will that you, who are the Bailey of the same, consider him as my honored and distinguished guest, that you treat him with every demonstration of honor and respect, and see that wherever he may go, he be shown hospitality. And so this is true. People in the streets would part to the side when he would come through with the Turkish Sultan and with the military. And Seward very much enjoys this, and he actually carries this firman with him and brings it back to Auburn when he returns, and it becomes part of his diplomatic gallery, which you'll see right here. So after about 2 weeks in Jerusalem, again, this was a really extensive part of the month, he goes up to Beirut for only a day. He stops here very briefly to meet politicians. He travels on the Austrian steamer ship called the Apollo. From Beirut, he spends some time in the water, but he heads right to Cyprus. And so Cyprus, again, very topographically similar to what he sees in Alexandria with the dryness, but he notes all of the clusters of date palms and orchids. They're also told it hasn't rained in 3 years and that the island is completely dried up. But either way, the island is abounding with the richest and rarest fruit. So the fruit is still surviving despite how dry it really is. He said the figs are wonderful. Of course, he indulges in the wine a little bit. And he does this when he meets the U.S. Consul, General Luigi di Cesnola. So Cesnola entertains them, and Seward says, we had an opportunity to test the island proverb that, quote, so many days are added to one's allotted term of life by every draught of its delicious wine, end quote. We did not quaff enough to add much to her longevity. So they were especially interested in Cesnola's rare collection of antiquities, because Cesnola was an archaeologist who had actually unearthed more than 14,000 articles consisting of works of art, statues, tablets, busts, vases, lamps, coins, utensils, and it really illustrates the history of not only Cyprus, but of civilization itself. And so he's such a well-known archaeologist. And as you'll see right here, we actually have a head from Pompeii, which was from an excavation from Cesnola. And then we also have this wine carafe that's thousands and thousands of years old, given to Seward by Cesnola. And these are both on display in our collection. So this really makes our collection ancient because we can date it all the way back to 2000 BC. Because of this wine decanter that we have. And so Seward really strikes up this relationship with Cesnola, and they would leave after only a few days there in Cyprus. But there was actually a little asterisk at the bottom of the page in the travel memoir for a footnote that says that since the book was written and published, the Met actually got almost all of Cesnola's collection in 1873. So the Metropolitan Museum of Art, their first director was actually Cesnola, and he donated a lot of these antiquities to begin the museum. So I thought that that was pretty interesting that they edited it to add that information. So from here, they get back on the Apollo, and they head up to Smyrna and Ephesus. Again, this is just a very quick day trip. They actually get on horses and they travel to see ancient ruins that are there. So he's taken around and they look at the ruins. Again, he's with these officials that are with him. He always also has a servant named William Bell. So Seward has his own companions with him. And they actually meet a researcher from the British Museum while they're traveling there who is studying the ancient ruins left behind. So they jump back on that ship. Again, these trips are very, very short. It's just a quick stop off and then get back on. And he travels over to Athens. And so he gets to Athens and he only has 36 hours to complete it. And he said that that was the only amount of time that they had, and that he didn't think Athens was any the lesser for it, for their quick amount of time to appreciate it. But again, while he's there, he really, really notes the differences he sees between Athens and, say, Cairo, Alexandria. He notes the emphasis on detail. The structures are not as overarching. They're smaller, more detailed. There's a lot more time was taken on them. And the modernity of the area as well. And they're more practical and detailed of the architecture here. And while he's here as well, he notes that how advanced they are. He says, even when we are extending the domain of science and demanding names for newly discovered substances, powers, forces, and qualities, we turn unhesitatingly to the full and expansive Greek language for a new technology. So he really understands that Greece, the Greek language is really the basis for this advancement of Western civilization. While he's there in Greece as well in his short amount of time, he also meets with Queen Olga Krishyanova of Russia. He is invited over to her palace. Her husband is George I of Greece, and he was actually in Copenhagen, so he was not present for their meeting. And Queen Olga is actually not in our diplomatic gallery, so Seward probably didn't have extensive relations with her as Secretary of State, and it was just more protocol and meeting her while he was there in Greece, so just the brief time he met her. Then from there, we're back on the Apollo, and we head up to Constantinople. And this is where it gets interesting for Seward's trip. So the entire time that he's traveling from place to place, they are expecting him and they're welcoming him. But he gets to Constantinople and he says, quote, "For we took Constantinople by surprise. Although Mr. Seward came as an invited guest of the Sultan, and although the U.S. legation had corresponded with him in both India and Egypt, about the time of his coming, neither crescent nor stars and stripes from the shore answered the signal which waved from the hour on the deck." So pretty much they forgot about Seward. He writes in there that the telegraph sent from Athens to Constantinople did not indicate the date that he was arriving. So they left him on the boat for a little bit, and then eventually someone noticed he was there and came to meet him. And when they finally came to get him, it actually started raining, and the carriage that they got in to ascend up to the hotel they were staying at crashed into a timber cart coming the opposite way. And so Seward writes they then had to traverse the rest of the journey on foot in the rain. So I thought that this was pretty comedic, that they had kind of forgotten about Seward. But I sure hope that Seward's trip gets better as he goes. But we will find this out at the end of July, where we will resume with his time in Constantinople.